You're listening to Recovery Survey, the podcast that shatters stigmas around different types of addictions and takes a deep dive into spiritual principles.
Had been out, and if I'm completely candid, doing a 3-day party run, kind of a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning nonstop party adventure. And I came back home to my condo and my door had been kicked in.
My guest today is named Tracy Brinkmann. He is the host of Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast. He's here to tell us about his journey from rock bottom in drug addiction and divorce to success in corporate America. Welcome to the show, Tracy.
All right. Well, I'm the humble Tracy Brinkmann, and I was lucky enough. My dad was in the military, and we, like I was sharing with you earlier, we moved probably every 2 or 3 years. So that builds me in the luck of being able to say I grew up knowing a lot of the United States. And we also spent a number of years over in Germany. So I got to learn a lot about people, different religions, different personality types, different ethnicities, the whole nine yards. And then, being, associated with the military, you even have that even more concentrated within the bases that we lived in across the years. So I can't say that I grew up with this one mindset of, what people are like. I was lucky enough to see a diverse set of folks. And my dad finally retired after about 23 years. So that would have been early teens for me. We settled into Southern California. And now my life goes from this, I'll call it very structured, things happen at a time, not militaristic as a whole, but certainly you're living a military lifestyle in that family life, to probably the most liberal of places on the planet, let alone in the United States, and all these new freedoms. And, I started making some, I'll call them questionable choices at best, associated with some folks I probably wouldn't associated before. And, just getting crazy as a teen. So, you're going to get crazy as a teen anyway. It's just kind of that fun part of growing up as a teen boy. But then you start doing the crazier things like, oh, let's go race cars, and let's toy with some drugs and what have you. And it got to a point where it's like, I'm gonna have to get away from this. And I joined the service and requested to go to Germany. So I went over to Europe for my tour of duty. And then when I got out of the service, I came back to Southern California and started a little business. This would have been right as the dot-com boom was happening, and I started a computer consulting business and started bringing in a pretty good coin, you could say. But this gave me the opportunity to start going back down the path I was on. Oh gosh, 6 years prior, before I left to join the service. And now I had money in the pocket, and I started toying with the drug arena. Speed mostly was the drug of choice for me. So I was out doing the pool circuit, doing some speed, having a good time, and got hooked pretty hard, pretty fast, to the point where I started selling it to support my habit. Totally neglected my business and my customers and what have you at that point. And for about 2-3 years was deep into the seedy side of the meth scene in Southern California. And and I don't know how deep we want to go into this, but certainly the ending point for me after a couple of years was had been out, and if I'm completely candid, doing a 3-day party run, kind of a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday morning nonstop party adventure. And I came back home to my condo and my door had been kicked in. And I thought at first it had been kicked in by, criminals. You're hanging out with that type of folks, it's not unlikely you may fall prey to some of them. And but when I went inside, it became evident that my door had been kicked in by the police. 50 had kicked in my door, not criminals, because it was like you see in the movies. Stuff was strewn all over the place. The furniture was in disarray. There was mashed potatoes, instant potatoes and cereal dumped out on the counter and in the sink as they were looking for things. So I clearly had gotten the attention of folks I didn't want to have the attention of. And that was my shining moment. And I say shining moment because if it had just been me, I may have continued on the path thinking, oh, that's all right. I can beat this. I'm smarter than these guys. But I had a moment of clarity because I had a 4-month-old daughter at that point in time. And it was no longer my life that I was putting at risk. It was hers as well. So it became that, tap on the shoulder. We'll call it an angelic tap on the shoulder. And I decided to clean up my act and clean up my life. And God, thank the heavens and or whoever you may believe in. Thank the powers above. I had a awesome set of parents and a very supportive. I call him my brother. We had known each other since our early teen years, and I called him my brother till he passed away just a few years ago. So they helped me in getting in cleaned up and what have you. So that's probably one of the big stories that came into my recovery piece. I'm not sure if there was anywhere you wanted to root around in that, more questions about it.
That sounds really intense. Did the police find anything? Did you get charged? Or was that more of a wake up call for you?
It was a little of both. I didn't get any charges. What here's what kind of happened to tell the rest of that piece of the story. So obviously starting to shuffle things around and trying to clean up the home a bit. And when I came home, it was in the middle of the night. It was dark 30 in the morning, and so I ended up shuffling around. I was still pretty wired and awake from the speed I was doing, and as I was moving around the house, knock comes on the door, and I open the door, and the two gentlemen introduce themselves as detectives, and they come on in, and they're asking me about what happened, who I was, et cetera, and did I have any ID? So if I take a step back. Before I went on this 3-day party binge, I had gone out with a friend of mine, and we went to the firing range, and we had he is a big gun advocate. I didn't have any weapons at the time in my home, thank goodness, with the raid, right? But we had been out to the firing range, and I asked if I could hold his guns because I wanted to go back to the firing range the next day or so. And so I had him in my briefcase. And so when these detective asked me for my ID, I said, "Yeah, sure, it's right over here in this briefcase." And I wasn't thinking anything about it. I walk over, I open the briefcase, and as soon as I open the briefcase, they see them, and it was a 38 and a 357 was in there, and one guy hollers gun to his partner as he's launching himself in the air to tackle me onto the couch and quickly handcuff my hands behind my back, and I hold no grudge about this because if I was a police officer who was investigating a potential drug drug dealer's home, and this guy opens up a briefcase and there are two weapons in there, I think I would have reacted the exact same way. So I get hauled down to the police station, and they were asking some very knowledgeable questions. They knew a lot about my life at that point, but I don't think they knew for sure. They were asking the questions of, is this person? Do you know this person? Do you know that person? And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I know that person, but I'm like, no, no, kind of thing. And they told me that the weapons had been reported stolen, and the gentleman who was a good friend of mine gets called down to the police station and tells the police, "Oh, that's right, I forgot. Tracy was carrying those for me because we were going to go back to the gun range, and so those stolen weapon charges were dropped as that was recanted." But the backstory behind that was the gentleman who owned the weapons had heard through the grapevine that someone had ratted me out. So he called the weapons in stolen. And that way he was disconnected from me because, he wasn't involved in that life, right? He wasn't doing anything. And so hearing that through the grapevine, he was trying to protect his family. And so once those charges were dropped and, everything else, I probably spent, I don't know, 18 hours in that precinct. They just let me go, and I walked home, and that was, so that comes to the second part of your question. It was a very eye-opening moment that, okay, not only did these guys kick open my door, but they really knew a lot about what I was involved in. And so if I stayed involved, it was probably not a good idea. And hence, like I said earlier, I made that decision, along with the fact that, I had the newborn daughter that was in the mix that would definitely be impacted the rest of her life.
All right, so that leads me to my next question.
Sure.
Did you stop cold turkey? Did you go to rehab? Did you do a detox? What does that look like?
I stopped cold turkey. I literally, packed up a suitcase full of clothes and everything for my daughter and went to my mom and dad's house, I won't say literally on my knees, but pleading for their help. I told them, I said, I need to get off these drugs now. I told her that, if mom, if I don't do any drugs, I'm going to be sleeping probably for 2, 3, 4 days straight, and I need someone to keep an eye on my daughter. And then, of course, I'm going to need to rebuild my life and, get a job and what have you. And the only way I felt I could do that was completely disconnected from anyone that, I had been associating with before. And while they only lived about 20 miles away, it may have been on the other side of the world, because those two worlds were so separate from one another, that I knew being that far away, world-wise, not by miles, would certainly lend to my recovery. And I did. I mean, I probably slept almost 3 days straight, getting up for the occasional meal and a body relief. But like I said, my parents were amazing and very supportive through this. They showed me no remorse for what I had put myself through. And trust me, I heard plenty of earfuls, especially from my dad, about risking my daughter's life. My dad was very pro family, and thank God for that, because that's probably what triggered my decision when I was walking home from the precinct of, oh my God, my family, my daughter, right? That was probably ringing inside me, because he had stilled that within me during my years growing up.
All right, so you said you went to your parents' house, you got cleaned up, you stopped using drugs. What are you doing in that time period? What's going on in your life? And then maybe we could jump to what's going on now in your life and what your life looks like today.
Oh my gosh, so much better. Before we fast forward though, I did want to share one piece of the recovery process for me that I think was kind of important to the story. Is I knew I had this, I'll call it, profitable skill set, because like I said before, uh, this endeavor, right, this adventure into the dark side started. I was doing computer programming, so back then computer programming skills were all the rave. And I actually didn't feel, and I'm doing air quotes, although you can't see it, worthy of putting myself back out there. It's like, hey, Mr. Potential Client, I could come in here and I could program your computers, and they could be looking at me like, didn't I just see you down at the local bar doing lines off some girl's belly? You know what I'm saying? So I have this self-worth issue that I was dealing with, even though, I'll say a couple of weeks or a month into it, I was feeling physically much better. I was looking physically much better, because obviously, when this whole recovery part started, I was all withdrawn, and my eyes were sunken in. I'd lost crazy amounts of weight, because you don't eat worth beans when you're doing that kind of a drug. So, I was starting to feel better, and I was starting to look better, but mentally, I had, my self-worth had taken a kick to the head by a Clydesdale. And so I went out there. The process of me rebuilding myself was literally going out and doing, I'll call them, day jobs. I was a filing clerk for a business part-time. I went out and did warehouse work, and trust me, for those that do that kind of work on an ongoing basis, I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying, at that time, I had the skill set to do something different. So I didn't feel worthy of it. So now I'm just putting myself out there saying, I'm going to do something to start building my self-confidence to feel like, all right, I'm worthy of doing something. And it worked. I mean, after about, I would say 6, 9 months of just getting out there and doing work on a daily basis, whether it's moving furniture around or filing, doing accounting for some, firm for temporary staffing agency, it made me feel better about who I was. And that gave me the confidence to go out and put myself back out into the marketplace. And I ended up landing a pretty good, and I call it an entry level role with the Coca-Cola company, which made me feel hugely better emotionally as well as professionally. So now I was working with this top-notch company, and I just threw myself into my job, and that started, obviously rebuilding that confidence. And I used my computer skills to literally program the computer to help me do my job at the time. And it wasn't a glamorous job. It was a parts expediter. And for those that don't know, you've all seen the Coca-Cola vans driving around that they service all the fountain accounts in any city you might live in. So in Southern California, they probably had 50 of those vans driving around. So it was my job to make sure all those vans were stocked with the right parts. So when they came to your restaurant or whatever to service your account, they wouldn't have to wait for parts except for extenuating circumstances. They could just service it off the van and get you pouring Coca-Cola product, which made us money, right? And that role ended up moving me to Atlanta, which was hugely opportunistic because obviously the best way to uh, grow within a company of that scale is to be at their headquarters, and that's where their headquarters is in Atlanta. And that started me on my corporate America, I'll call it rocket ride. Probably saw 5 promotions over the next 4 or 5 years as I started climbing up the planning marketing arm of Coca-Cola North America. So that kind of answers your question at the same time because I started believing in myself again, in my skill sets, learning an entirely new set of skills when it came to marketing in corporate America and doing logistics planning and inventory management. And I ended up getting put into a management role within the organization. So now I'm leading people, which oddly enough was a lot easier to do because of my previous experience on the dark side. You're leading people in that environment as well when you were doing what I was doing, but obviously it's not the same, right? But some of the same skills apply, right? You need to get people to do things. You learn how to motivate them using tactics and strategies. I was just learning the far better tactics and strategies now. So, I mean, and then to finish answering your question, my life is far better now. I'm married an amazing woman about four years ago now. We're working on year four, who that I met probably about 6 years ago, and we're probably so much alike and just enough different to keep things interesting. I've got 3 amazing kids in my life, and live in a reasonably good home. Doing entrepreneurial things while still holding a day job. I think I'm living the American dream, even bouncing back from, the American nightmare.
I know before we started recording, you told me a little bit about your daughter. I wasn't sure if you wanted to talk about that chapter in your life or if you wanted to skip over that.
No, I think that's it's kind of a sidebar on the same topic. So, when I decided to get out of the drug scene, the lady at the time who was my girlfriend and the mother of my daughter, she came along with me, and in the quote unquote deal was the arrangement was all right. Well, we're getting off this. We're getting out of the drug scene. If you're going to continue to do drugs, that is not going to work. And you're not going to be a part of my life, which means you're not going to be a part of this little girl's life. And that probably worked for, I don't know, 3 4 months. And she started you know redabbling back into the drug scene. I think it was a little harder for her because by profession she was a barmaid, so she was working in bars. And And especially in Southern California, about any bar you could go into, it was easy to, find any kind of drug, be it marijuana or speed or cocaine or whatever, back then. So for me, I totally disconnected from this, the scene, like I said, and all the people around it, and brought her with. But here she was re-immersing herself into it, and that's, if you've been down that path, it's really difficult to associate with, those kind of folks and still stay away, especially when you're early on in your recovery. So, she ended up going back in to the scene, and that gets her ousted out of my life. And then, so there's the whole court battle we end up going through for custody for the rights of my daughter. And, luckily I could prove my sobriety, and she helped prove her non-sobriety. I mean, this was almost like a scene for a movie, right? So we're walking in to the courthouse, and I say we, and when I say that, it's me, my mother, and my father, and my little girl at this point, who's probably right around a year old now. And so we're in there, and our lawyer's there, and we're sitting at the table, and the mom was late, and we're waiting. We're called up, and we're waiting, and the judge is like, "Is she going to show up?" All of a sudden, we hear these, and this is no exaggeration, the clicking of high heels on the marble floor of the courtroom. And I turn and look over my shoulder, and if I could dress her any more like a streetwalker. I don't want to be rude, but I want to give people a picture. It was a skin tight dress that stopped way too high on the thighs, probably 4-inch high heels, a preponderance of makeup, and walking in looking like that. I'm thinking, oh my God, how could you present yourself like that to the court? And, as I think about it right now, which probably helped me in the process, that this is not the image you want someone, even a mother, presented with. And then she was clearly, a little spun on her drug of choice at the time, which, made I think the judge's decision a whole lot easier. It awarded me full physical custody, and then gave her, what is that called? Supervised visits for every other weekend. And then over that time, she got deeper and deeper into things. So it was represented to the courts that she was not staying away. She wasn't being clean and sober. So that gave me full of both, which was perfect, because that was right about the time I had got my role. The role I was doing at the Coca-Cola company was actually moved to Atlanta, and so I was able to get that. And as part of that move, I had a new lady in my life, and so she came out to Atlanta after we were married, and she stumbled into the drug scene in Atlanta. And or excuse me, let me back up. She stumbled back into the drug scene in California right about the time which would be my second daughter, was going to be born, and literally um, did speed while she was pregnant, which caused some issues with the pregnancy itself, which caused Krista to be born with a distended abdomen. And oh my goodness, and for those that don't know, a distended abdomen, if you picture a cliche beer drinker with, and I say that like a man, right, with that big old belly hanging up over his lap as he's tossing back, way too many beers. That's what she came out looking like. And what had happened is one of the arteries didn't fully develop, and that didn't provide the blood supply to her small intestine. So she came out with a blocked intestine and only about 23 centimeters of small intestine, where when usually you're born with, I think it's over 100, right? So now she didn't have enough small intestine to sustain life, because that's where all the nutrition is absorbed through the processing of the food. So in the first 3 months of life, she went through 6 pretty major operations. trying to stabilize her life, give her enough small bowel to absorb nutrition, to be self-sustaining. One of the operations installed what's called a TPN line, a total parental nutrition line. Literally, if you could picture, a hose, a small IV tube going in right above where your heart is at, and it would feed in basically the raw nutrients that you or anyone would need to sustain life. Well, the body, being the amazing tool that is, in Krista, said, okay, well, if you're going to be giving me these raw nutrients, you don't need a filter. So I'm going to go ahead and let this liver deteriorate. So now she needs a liver and small bowel transplant. And so we go through getting her all stabilized. The doctors did an amazing job at the Children's Hospital in Atlanta, getting her all stabilized and ready to go, and getting her on the organ donor list. And all you can do at that point is wait and hope. And we had this beeper that was issued to us saying that if this beeper goes off, grab your pre-packed bag and get to the hospital, because there's a short timeline by which you can have these organs processed and transplanted into. And that beeper went off one time. And anyone who's been a mother or a father, and they don't know when the due date is, and they just know the basic timeline. They've got all those bags pre-packed and probably sitting by the door, which we did. We had them sitting in a little closet right there by the front door. And I think I broke every land speed law physically possible as I was driving towards the hospital after that beeper went off. And unfortunately, the donor, it was a youngster, I believe it was a young boy, if I remember correctly, unfortunately had been the victim of abuse, and the damage in the potential donor of the organs was too severe. So it was ended up being a false alarm as a result. So now I'm scared for Krista, but I'm really angry for what had happened to this young man, right? So that could have potentially saved my child's life. So you got all these emotions going on. You're happy that it didn't happen. You're sad that it didn't happen. It was kind of this crazy, tumultuous time. And after that false alarm, they said the best place for Krista to have this operation would be in Pittsburgh. Now, mind you, like I said, we're still down in Atlanta. So Mom and Krista move up to Pittsburgh, and thank goodness for places like the Ronald McDonald House, because the baby obviously was staying in the hospital a lot of the time, but Mom didn't have a place to live, and we didn't have the means by which to afford two homes. So, Ronald McDonald House steps in, and they're, I think 2 blocks away from the hospital. And, me and my oldest daughter from the previous story are going up there on occasion, every weekend or two to visit. And, and anyone who's a parent will know what I'm about to say. There was one weekend that I walked into Krista's hospital room, and it's just something wasn't right. And mind you, she's, almost 18 months old at this point, and she's been going through this since day one. So, you know, my baseline for her being okay is different than, anyone who has a quote unquote normal child, right? But even still, I walked in and it's like, God, there's just something wrong. And I want to say it was 3-4 weeks prior to that, Krista had one of the candy stripers or nurse's assistants had dropped Krista, and she landed on her head. So her body is fighting this hematoma on her skull. All the while, her body is already in a weakened state. So she had been deteriorating a bit over the past 3 weeks. But this one weekend, like I said, I walked in, it was just something gnawing at me that is something really wrong. And so I pull the doctor aside, and I'm asking, hey, if the organs were available right now, do you think she would survive the operation? I got a lot of doctor speak, him hauling around, and no joke, grabbed him by the collar of his, probably a sleeve of his coat, and pulled him into a janitor's closet in the hallway and closed the door. I said, look, it's just you and me, right? No hospital administrators, no insurance companies, just two people talking about the life of my daughter. And I finally got the answer. He didn't believe she would survive. And okay, not the answer I wanted to hear, but certainly now I'm informed, right? Which led me to my next question. Do you think her health would improve to the point where she would survive? And eventually the answer came out that I didn't believe that she would be able to regain enough physical stamina or health, whatever you want to call it, to survive the operation. And so at this point, she's on a respirator because of the deteriorating health issues I mentioned earlier. So the question becomes, of us as parents, do we leave her on the respirator or not? And anyone who's faced with this decision, it's very personal. And whatever decision they've made or will make in their lifetime, it is just that. It's very personal. But for me, it felt like if I was going to keep her here on machines, keeping her alive, I'd be keeping her here for me. And that would be selfish. And I had spent enough time being selfish in those dark drug-induced days, almost risking the life of my now oldest daughter. So, for me, the decision was pretty easy well, not easy, but it was a lot more logical to not be selfish and keep her there for me while she's in pain. And so we disconnected the machines, wrapped her up in her favorite blanket, and I literally, no joke, sat down in the rocking chair that was in her ER room and rocked her to sleep one last time. Sorry, getting a little misty eyed just thinking about it. But and that's good and bad that I got to do that. I think it was very good that I got to do that because it gave me the opportunity to tell her in her final time with us all the amazing lessons that she had taught me, how to look at life through different eyes, how to, try to approach each day with a big, bright smile on her face, which she did. Even when we knew she was in pain, she always had a smile on her face and was always trying to check out new things. And she did this thing with her finger like E.T., where she would reach out. And anytime something new was introduced to her, she'd reach out with that one finger and touch it. And once she felt it was safe after touching it, it was like any baby. It was in her mouth or she was eating it or, playing with it, whatever. All these amazing lessons that she taught me in her short time, I got to thank her for those and tell her goodbye. Right. So, that was, emotional, a roller coaster, dark time number two. And I think having gone through and gone through successfully my drug addiction and sobriety of that, it helped me not go back because I could easily say, okay, whatever you believe in threw this curveball at me. I don't deserve this. I could throw all the blame and start saying, okay, I'm going to start doing some drugs just to, just to deaden the pain, so to speak. But again, for me, that would have been selfish. Plus, I still had my oldest daughter, looking at me with these big brown eyes going, hey, daddy, what's going on? And how do you explain death to someone who's probably 4 or 5, and everything. So having gone through that and recovered from that, I think helped me stay on the right path in this next big emotional and traumatic time in my life.
I can't even begin to imagine what that would be like. I'm so sorry for your loss.
It's a tough one to explain to folks. It really is because I say and I still believe to this day. I mean, I've known a lot of people in my 50 plus years on this planet, and I've never disliked someone to the point where I could wish them that level of pain. There's no one on this planet that I hate so much, and I don't use that word easily, that I would want them to feel that because it never goes away, right? I mean, even telling the story, I'm getting wispy eyed, but it can break you or it can define you. And I try to make it definitive, right? I threw myself back into work and personal development became a huge part of my life. I learned I won't say love, but certainly my my draw towards public speaking, because while Krista was going through everything, anyone who would listen, and probably a few people that didn't want to listen, heard about the pros of being an organ donor. So, and after her passing, I continued that speaking, and as I got into personal development to help me learn more about enhancing my mindset and keeping myself from going back to the dark path. Not to sound like Star Wars or anything, but I started, using those messages on platforms of, 1, 5, 10, 50. I've spoken up to 5,000, I believe it was, at a doctor and nurse convention. So, I found a number of passions coming out of this, of both pains. And I think that's probably one of the magic pivot points for me is and I'll be cliche, they say every dark cloud has a silver lining. And I think there's some truth to that. If you're willing to stare into the dark cloud and find what learnings you can glean from them, right? What can you glean from having been an addict, whatever addiction may be to you? It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be sex or pornography or whatever, right? What can you glean out of that after you start down your recovery path? What can I glean out of losing a daughter? Well, gosh, it helped me remember all the lessons my dad taught me about how important family is. They're not going to be here forever. Sometimes they'll be here forever comes a lot sooner than you think.
Man, it sounds like you've been on a difficult road and you've faced a lot of challenges, and I'm just really blown away by your optimism and your positive attitude.
I think for me, one of the big ways I've been able to be positive about it is I own it, right? I own the fact that nobody made me drink what I was drinking back then. No one made me do the drugs I was doing. No one forced me to roll up a dollar bill and go, right? No one made me do any of that. I made bad choices and I own them, right? And I owned the dark side. So not trying to hide from that doesn't make me have to tell fibs or alter stories or, yeah, not everyone wants to say, you know what, I used to do drugs as a teenager. And I think so many people want to ignore or, hide away from, and that causes some conflict internally. And then that conflict, well, it's going to alter how you think. It's going to alter your perception of reality, and everyone's perception of reality is their reality. So I think being able to say, yeah, I did stupid crap, right? And I've paid a price for that. The person that was in my life that was Krista's mom did stupid crap, and Krista paid a price for that, right? And so we all paid a price for that. So I can't go around blaming God or Allah or the universe or the doctors or the drug dealer. I can't blame anyone. So that makes it a lot easier to say, okay, well, that means more of this stuff is in my control than not. If I'm blaming someone, then I'm relinquishing that control to someone else, and now I'm fighting for that control. Well, it's inside kind of thing. So that I think that's a huge factor in being a lot more positive about it than some folks would be.
I really appreciate you being on the show and sharing your journey with us. In closing, would you like to maybe tell the listeners about your podcast or shout out your social media accounts?
I definitely would. Thank you so much. Like you mentioned earlier, I am the host of the Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast, which you can find on any of the major platforms and a lot of the minor ones as well. But if you don't want to go searching for it, you can certainly go to my website, which is darkhorseschooling.com. And then there's a podcast tab there. You can check out all the podcasts. Again, it's all focused on entrepreneurship and personal development, trying to share some of the lessons I've learned over the years.
Tracy, thank you again for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Tracy, thank you again for being on the show. Be sure to check out his podcast, Dark Horse Entrepreneur. The links for that, as well as his social media and website, will be in the show notes. You've been listening to Recovery Survey. If you got anything out of today's episode, I'd ask you to please leave us a 5-star review and share this episode with a friend. If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can find us at recoverysurvey.com. You can listen to all of our episodes on the website, as well as connect with us on social media, where you can get previews for upcoming episodes. Hey guys, I wanted to let you know about an exciting new partnership with Broken Chains Apparel. They're a custom online shirt retailer that designs cool shirts for people in recovery. They want you to be proud of your recovery and wear it boldly. They're offering our listeners a 20% discount. All you have to do is use the promo code RECOVERY at checkout. Go grab your shirts today at brokenchainsapparel.com and follow them on Facebook and Instagram at Broken Chains Apparel.